October 27, 1942. First light broke across the South Pacific Ocean, 420 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Commander Edward P. Parker's hands gripped the cold steel rail of USS Northampton as he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. The USS Hornet, a burning wreck now, slipped down into the black water. 140 American sailors went with her, good men who would never see home again. The last operational fleet carrier in the Pacific was gone. Fire from her shattered fuel tanks lit up the ocean for miles, transforming the water into a sea of orange and red, a mirror of flame that reflected the catastrophe unfolding right before his eyes. He looked at his personal log later that day and wrote words he knew could get him court-martialed if anyone discovered them. 4 carriers in 10 months. At this rate, we'll have nothing left by Christmas. Through the smoke and chaos, the reality became impossible to ignore. In just 1942 alone, America had lost 4 fleet carriers. The Lexington went down on May 8th off Coral Sea. The Yorktown followed on June 7th at Midway. Then came the Wasp on September 15th, torpedoed near Guadalcanal, and now the Hornet, sinking into the ocean on October 27th. The Imperial Japanese Navy, the very force American intelligence had dismissed as inferior copyists, incapable of real innovation, had methodically destroyed more than half of America's Pacific carrier fleet. Meanwhile, in shipyards scattered across Japan from Yokosuka to Kure, Japanese workers were building new carriers, while America's fleet was disappearing beneath the waves faster than anyone thought possible. 3,700 miles away in Newport News, Virginia, a woman named Margaret Thompson was about to start the night shift. She had no idea that this ordinary moment would prove Commander Parker's despair completely wrong. Neither of them could have known that what felt like maximum disaster was actually the beginning of something unprecedented, the most extraordinary production miracle in all of naval history. American industrial capacity was about to be unleashed in ways that would transform not just this war, but the entire nature of naval power forever. Victory would be rewritten not through superior tactics or brilliant seamanship, but through welding torches, assembly lines, and the sheer productive power of a democracy finally awakened to the demands of total war. The collapse of American carrier power in 1942 was about to trigger a response so overwhelming that Japanese naval officers would later describe it with awe and dread. Like fighting the stars themselves, they said, because no matter how many you destroyed, more kept appearing. Within 3 years, American shipyards would put 14 Essex-class fleet carriers into combat, more carriers than Japan would build during the entire war. The path from disaster to dominance wouldn't come through tactical genius or some revolutionary new technology. It would come through something far more fundamental, the complete mobilization of American industrial democracy. Housewives became welders, farm boys became shipfitters. An entire nation transformed itself into exactly what Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had feared most, an arsenal of unlimited productive capacity. The catastrophe had been building since May 8, 1942, when the USS Lexington took the first of many blows. This massive pre-war carrier, built from a battlecruiser hull, was operating in the Coral Sea when Japanese aircraft found her. 2 torpedo hits, 3 bomb strikes. The ship's damage control teams fought desperately to keep her afloat. At first they seemed to be winning, but gasoline vapors from the ruptured aviation fuel tanks suddenly ignited, triggering massive secondary explosions that swept through the vessel. The Lexington, Lady Lex as the sailors called her, went down with 216 of her crew. She became America's first fleet carrier loss of the war. Captain Frederick Sherman, who commanded the Lexington, would testify before Congress about the nightmare that was unfolding. "We went to war with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific," he said. "The Japanese started with 10. The arithmetic was something every admiral understood perfectly. America couldn't afford to trade evenly with the enemy, much less lose carriers faster than Japan could lose them." Exactly 1 month later, the second blow struck. The USS Yorktown had been damaged at Coral Sea, but the Navy performed an almost miraculous repair job in just 48 hours at Pearl Harbor. Then, on June 7, 1942, after playing a crucial role in the victory at Midway, the Yorktown was caught by Japanese submarine I-168. The torpedoes found their mark, and this precious carrier went down. Midway had been a strategic triumph, 4 Japanese carriers destroyed, but America could afford to lose this one even less. September 15th brought the third catastrophe. The USS Wasp was operating off Guadalcanal when Japanese submarine I-19 attacked. 3 torpedo hits sent the carrier into flames. She burned for hours before the decision was made to scuttle her. American destroyer Lansdowne put her out of her misery. Of the 7 fleet carriers America had at the start of the war, 3 were now gone. Then came the knockout punch. October 26 to 27, the Battle of Santa Cruz. The USS Hornet, a veteran of the Doolittle raid and Midway, faced coordinated attacks from Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes. American sailors tried everything to save her. They attempted to tow the burning carrier toward safety. But advancing Japanese surface forces made that impossible. The Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo moved in during the early morning darkness and finished the job that their aircraft had started. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, stood before Congress and delivered numbers that felt like a death sentence. "Gentlemen, we have 1 operational fleet carrier in the Pacific. Enterprise. She faces 10 Japanese carriers. The mathematics of this situation suggests we have already lost the war." But King didn't know about Margaret Thompson and the 1.7 million workers who would soon flood into American shipyards. He didn't know about Henry Kaiser, who was about to accomplish something nobody thought possible, reducing the time to build a Liberty ship from 230 days down to 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. He didn't know that American shipyards, which had launched exactly 1 fleet carrier in 1941, were about to do something that would seem like magic. The transformation didn't begin in military planning rooms with generals and admirals. It started in the accounting offices of Newport News Shipbuilding, where a yard supervisor named Clay Bedford called an emergency meeting the day after Pearl Harbor with his entire foreman staff. He said something that seemed almost impossible. "Forget everything you know about shipbuilding. We're going to build carriers like Ford builds cars." The revolution started with a simple observation. Helen Matthews was a former seamstress hired as part of the emergency workforce expansion. She watched skilled workers laboriously riveting steel plates together, thousands upon thousands of individual rivets, each one driven by hand. She asked her supervisor a question that changed everything. "Why don't you sew it together like fabric? One continuous seam instead of thousands of separate dots." The supervisor laughed at first, then he stopped. Welding instead of riveting could cut assembly time in half, maybe more. But here was the real breakthrough. Welding required different skills, simpler skills, skills that could be taught to almost anyone in just days, instead of the years it took to train a master riveter. By summer 1943, the Essex-class carriers were rolling off the ways at a pace that seemed to defy all logic. The USS Essex herself had been laid down on April 28, 1941, and commissioned on December 31, 1942, just 20 months from keel to combat readiness. But that was only the beginning of what would happen. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, a shipfitter named Giuseppe Di Maggio, who happened to be a cousin of the baseball player, led a team that developed a revolutionary new technique for installing aircraft elevators. Instead of building them piece by piece while they were already in the carrier, the team pre-assembled entire elevator platforms on shore, then lifted them into position using massive cranes. That single innovation saved 6 weeks per carrier. The techniques Henry Kaiser was pioneering at Richmond were spreading throughout the entire industry. Prefabrication changed everything. Deck houses and other fixtures were assembled in production areas where they could be built on their sides or even upside down, making the welding stronger and faster. What had once required 1,000 workers laboring for a month could now be done by 200 workers in a single week. The numbers began accumulating with terrifying speed. USS Yorktown, CV-10, laid down December 1, 1941, commissioned April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid, laid down December 1, 1941, commissioned August 16, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, laid down August 3, 1942, commissioned November 29, 1943. USS Franklin, laid down December 7, 1942, commissioned January 31, 1944. As the launchings accelerated, a welder named Philippa Kellogg, who worked at Bethlehem Steel's Fall River shipyard, kept a diary tracking the impossible acceleration. In January 1943, she wrote that they were launching a carrier every 60 days. By June 1943, every 45 days. By December 1943, every 30 days. The Japanese must think we're using magic, she wrote. The magic was actually people. By April 1943, 40% of the laborers at Kaiser's shipways and prefabrication facilities were women. At Norfolk Naval Shipyard, a Mexican-American mother of 3 named Emma Rodriguez, who had never held a tool larger than a sewing needle, became the fastest riveter in the entire yard. She could drive 30 perfect rivets in a single minute. African-American workers, previously barred from skilled positions in shipyards, flooded into the yards after Executive Order 8802 prohibited discrimination in defense industries. James Washington, a sharecropper from Alabama, became a master pipe fitter at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He installed fuel lines on 5 carriers, each one finished faster than the last. These workers weren't simply building ships, they were racing against death itself. Every day without new carriers meant more American sailors and Marines dying on islands scattered across the Pacific. Posted on every shipyard wall were photographs from the fleet with stark messages. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. Speed came not just from human effort, but from revolutionary production techniques. Engineers at New York Naval Yard developed modular construction. Instead of building a carrier from the keel up, piece by piece, they built entire sections complete with wiring, plumbing, and ventilation systems already installed. Then they assembled these massive sections like giant building blocks. Production was streamlined through highly standardized components, reducing total construction time to as little as 14 months for the fastest builds. Every carrier used identical pumps, identical electrical panels, identical fittings wherever possible. Parts manufactured in Detroit could be installed in carriers being built in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia without any modification whatsoever. The Essex class became the most significant class of warships in all of American naval history. These weren't simple replacements for lost carriers. They were bigger, faster, more capable than anything that had come before. Each displaced 27,100 tons, could carry 90 to 100 aircraft, and could steam at 33 knots, faster than most destroyers. Japanese commanders noticed immediately. A Japanese air staff officer named Masatake Okumiya wrote in his diary after receiving intelligence reports, "The Americans are building carriers faster than we can train pilots. Each new carrier is superior to anything we possess. We are not fighting the same Navy that attacked Pearl Harbor." By March 1944, American shipyards had accomplished what seemed impossible, launching Essex-class carriers at a rate that exceeded the combined carrier production of every other nation on Earth. While the major naval yards built fleet carriers, Henry Kaiser revolutionized the construction of escort carriers, the smaller jeep carriers that would provide air cover for invasion fleets and hunt submarines. Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard alone would produce 50 escort carriers using techniques developed for Liberty ships. The escort carrier USS Casablanca, lead ship of the most numerous carrier class ever built, went from keel laying to commissioning in less than 8 months. By comparison, the Japanese escort carrier Shinyo, which had been converted from a passenger liner, took 2 full years to complete. Behind every rivet, every weld, every steel plate lay a supply chain that stretched across an entire continent. The American industrial machine was awakening to its true power. The steel for those carrier flight decks originated in Pittsburgh, where the mills never stopped, operating around the clock every single day of the week. The aluminum destined for aircraft came streaming out of Alcoa facilities scattered across Tennessee, drawing so much electricity that entire cities would have dimmed if the power had been diverted. Over in Akron, Ohio, the Goodyear plant hummed with purpose, manufacturing the arresting cables that would grab carrier aircraft. Each cable possessed the strength to halt a fighter plane worth 12,000 pounds, screaming down at 100 miles per hour, and bring it to a complete stop. William Davis managed that Akron operation, and under his leadership, something remarkable happened. In 1942, the plant produced 10 of those cables each month. By 1944, that number had exploded to 200. But building ships meant nothing without people trained to operate them. Captain Daniel Gallery understood this fundamental truth. He proposed something unconventional. Why not use the Great Lakes themselves as a classroom? The USS Wolverine and USS Sable, former paddle-wheel steamers transformed into makeshift training carriers, operated from Chicago's Navy Pier. By 1944, these two converted vessels had become a factory for naval aviators. They qualified 500 pilots every single month, turning inexperienced men into combat-ready flyers. The Japanese watched these intelligence reports arrive in Tokyo with mounting dread. Captain Toshikazu Omori, serving as operations officer for the combined fleet, later shared what he had witnessed during those months. The American capacity seemed incomprehensible. Japan's officers calculated that the Americans might manage to construct 6 or 7 fleet carriers by the end of 1945. The actual number defied all their assumptions. General Gisaburo Ozawa commanded the Japanese carrier force when it faced the Americans at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. He brought 6 carriers to that engagement. The Americans arrived with 9 fleet carriers and 8 light carriers. Ozawa's perspective on what unfolded was brutally honest. It was not a battle at all, he wrote afterward. It became an execution. By January 1945, American shipyards had achieved something that defied logic. The rhythm of production had become unstoppable. Brooklyn Navy Yard juggled 3 carriers in simultaneous construction. Newport News operated 6 different slipways, each one holding carriers in various stages of assembly and completion. Among all wartime accomplishments, USS Lake Champlain set the ultimate standard. The ship received its commission on June 3, 1945, after merely 15 months of construction, a time frame that seemed almost impossible. That speed came with a terrible price, though. Shipyard accidents claimed over 3,000 lives during those war years. Marguerite O'Brien experienced the cruelest moment when a crane cable snapped at the Fall River shipyard. Her husband died in that instant. She returned to work the following week, stepping into his position on the welding crew. Every ship we don't build means more gold stars hanging in windows back home, she told the people working beside her. When Japan's surrender delegation boarded the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, they sailed past an American fleet that seemed almost supernatural in its scale. Over 100 carriers of every conceivable type crowded Tokyo Bay and the waters surrounding it. This single collection represented more carriers than all the other nations combined had produced throughout the entire history of naval aviation. Commander Tamichi Hara, decorated among Japan's finest destroyer captains, reflected on this overwhelming sight. He had personally sent 4 American carriers to the ocean floor in 1942. The Americans had replaced each one not once, but 3 times over. The statistics spoke louder than any weapon ever could. Among the Essex-class carriers that entered combat during World War II, the record showed USS Essex commissioned December 31, 1942, USS Yorktown on April 15, 1943, USS Intrepid on August 16, 1943, USS Hornet on November 29, 1943, USS Franklin on January 31, 1944, USS Ticonderoga on May 8, 1944, USS Randolph on October 9, 1944, USS Lexington on February 17, 1943, USS Bunker Hill on May 24, 1943, USS Wasp on November 24, 1943, USS Hancock on April 15, 1944, USS Bennington on August 6, 1944, USS Bon Richard on November 26, 1944, and USS Shangri-La on September 15, 1944. Beyond those that saw combat, more Essex-class carriers were commissioned but never reached Japanese waters. USS Boxer arrived on April 16, 1945, USS Lake Champlain on June 3, 1945, and USS Antietam on January 28, 1945. Several more received their commissions after the war concluded. This accounting didn't even include the 9 Independence-class light carriers constructed or the over 100 escort carriers produced during that same period. The techniques developed during wartime shipbuilding permanently altered American industry. Modular construction, automated welding, assembly line methods applied to massive vessels, All of this became the new standard. Workers trained in the yards emerged as the foundation of post-war American manufacturing. Women who mastered welding torches discovered they could excel at any industrial challenge placed before them. African Americans who had been confined to menial positions before the war proved conclusively they possessed the precision and skill required for complex work. By 1945, carrier production had actually surpassed what the Navy could effectively deploy. Ships were sliding off the ways faster than crews could be assembled and trained. Admiral William Halsey testified before Congress in 1946 with a note of astonishment. We progressed from having too few carriers to possessing more than we could reasonably use. No nation in human history has ever produced combat vessels at this velocity. In 1985, when Newport News Shipbuilding marked the 40th anniversary of VJ Day, more than 5,000 former workers gathered for the reunion. Margaret Thompson, the welder whose story had opened this account, now stood at 67 years old before that crowd. "They call us the greatest generation," she said. "But we weren't great. We were angry. The Japanese destroyed our ships and took our boys from us. We responded the only way we understood. We built more ships than they could possibly imagine. Every rivet we hammered into place whispered a message. Remember Pearl Harbor. The carrier construction program reshaped far more than military capability. It transformed the entire American economy and society." Richmond, California witnessed its population explode from 23,000 to 130,000 in just 3 years. The billions of dollars paid to shipyard workers, over $3 billion in wages, circulated through the economy, creating the foundation of the American middle class. The shipyards demolished social barriers that had endured for generations, demonstrating conclusively that women possessed the capacity for industrial labor and that African Americans possessed identical skills and abilities when opportunity was finally granted. By August 1945, the United States Navy commanded 14 Essex-class fleet carriers that had participated in combat operations. 3 additional Essex-class carriers had been commissioned but hadn't reached the fight. 9 Independence-class light carriers operated in the Pacific. 71 escort carriers served across various theaters. Pre-war carriers remained in service as well. This massive force contrasted starkly with Japan's situation. 6 operational carriers remained, most critically short of trained pilots, and Britain maintained 19 carriers across all classifications. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force made a pilgrimage to Norfolk Naval Shipyard, where so many Essex-class carriers had been constructed. Standing at the precise location where USS Yorktown had launched, Yano spoke through an interpreter. "We understood you were constructing ships," he said. "But we never grasped the scale of it. How does a nation fight an opponent capable of building in a single yard what we produced throughout our entire empire? We didn't lose in battle against your navy," Yano continued. "We lost to your factories, to your workers, to your determination to manufacture beyond every rational limit." Admiral Chester Nimitz offered the most definitive assessment of all. "The war's outcome was decided in 1943, he stated, not by any military engagement, but by the launching of new carriers. When we could absorb the loss of a carrier and already have 2 replacements crossing the ocean, while Japan possessed no replacement capacity whatsoever, the mathematics became inevitable. Victory had been secured. The shipbuilding revolution of 1942 to 1945 continues to shape naval construction today. Those techniques remain embedded in modern practice. But perhaps the deepest legacy involves a broader lesson: the extraordinary capacity of democratic societies when unified behind a common purpose. In 36 months, America journeyed from losing 4 carriers and teetering on the edge of potential defeat to commanding overwhelming carrier supremacy. That guaranteed victory. Those workers demonstrated something fundamental about democracy. The true weapon isn't military hardware, it's productive capacity. It's the power of free people to outbuild, outproduce, and ultimately overwhelm oppression. The journey from 4 carriers lost in 1942 to 14 Essex-class carriers engaged in combat represents history's greatest industrial response to military catastrophe. Nearly all those workers have passed from this world now, yet their achievement endures. When humanity faced its darkest moment, when fascism threatened to extinguish liberty itself, American workers responded with the most extraordinary outpouring of productive power ever witnessed in human history. The four carriers lost that terrible year. Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet didn't merely get replaced, they were multiplied many times over. Each new carrier surpassed what had been destroyed, standing as proof of democracy's power to transform disaster into triumph. In the final accounting, Japan didn't fall to superior American strategy or battlefield tactics. Japan surrendered to Margaret Thompson and her welding torch, to millions of ordinary Americans who proved that democracy's ultimate strength rests in the boundless productive capacity of a free people moving forward with unified purpose. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers engaged in combat, the numbers tell a story of metamorphosis that stands as humanity's greatest testament to what free people accomplish when their freedom faces genuine threat. They didn't merely build ships, they constructed victory, they forged freedom, and they created the future. Their legacy persists eternal in the words engraved on the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. There, American workers faced tyranny with steel, met fascism with freedom, and answered defeat with the greatest production miracle human history has ever witnessed.